So one more time. So the point I left off with is I want to push this point forward so we can move to the next part of Mechaka Chaim Chesed, which is the Avad Ram's idea of why Tchias HaMesim is mentioned 3 times. So he says the first one refers to when you wake up in the morning. The second one refers to the fact that tzaddikim receive Tchias HaMesim, and the third one is referring to Tchias HaMesim and La'asad Lava. Right? So the question is, what's the purpose of having it 3 times in davening, in Mechaka Chaim Chesed? What's the Avad Ram trying to tell us?
What's the second one?
Okay, one second. First one is I wake up in the morning. Okay. Second one, Mechaka Chaim Chesed, Mechai Mesim Rachim Rabim. That's referring to the tzaddikim. Okay, and the third one is Venem Anato Lachios Mesim, which we'll get into a little deeper when we get to that part. But Baruch Hashem Mechai Mesim. So why do you have 3 times?
What about the tzaddikim? What about their
They get Tchias Mesim. That's what you're referencing.
Isn't that lost of love?
Okay. So one question is, why is that different than the Tchias HaMesim Lost Lava? Let's not get into, like I said, let's not get into Sajagon, Ravan, etc. Let's just take it as a given that only good people get Tchias HaMesim. So what's the difference between the second and third one, right? Okay. So what do you say? There must be a reason why Chazal chose to repeat Tchias HaMesim 3 times. There's something about Tchias HaMesim in its expression of Koach HaKadosh Baruch Hu that makes it the dominant theme, all right, in this Tefilah. So why?
It's because it's
One approach you could take, which I hear, one approach is to say it's a progression. You're going from the, let's be to refine it a little bit more, but you want to say that really it's different degrees of Koach. The first one being, the Havdil, the weakest type of Koach, but not obviously weak, leading to the greatest expression of Koach. So that's one road you could take. But I have a different approach. Not massively different, but somewhat different. Because maybe it's like this. Maybe you could say that in other words, what's the objective here? You want to show that Tchias HaMesim is really the paradigm expression of God's Gvura. Okay? So it could be that in order to express the idea of God's Gvura, it's interesting that it shows Tchias HaMesim. What's the most interesting idea to choose Tchias HaMesim of all the koachs of a Kadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak? All the expressions of Gvura.
never seen it.
Right. There's never really been, let's put aside Elisha and Eliyahu, and then the Nevuah of Yechezkel, which is a machlokes of Gemara, whether that's literal or not, as a general phenomenon, as a phenomenon itself, it's just not something that we come across on a normal basis. If you look at the other things, as we'll get to next, Somech, Noflim, Rofei Cholim, Matir Asurim,
What was the Nebuah of Yechezkel?
the bones coming together.
Flesh.
Oh yeah, flesh. So it was a whole machlokes whether that really took place or was just simply a metaphor. So the Rambam cites that in his Yigaras Tchias HaMesim as being a machlokes. So the thing is that so what is it about? So it's interesting you choose Tchias HaMesim, which is the which we've expressed before why that's such a great gvura, but yet it's something we have never experienced before and we've never seen before. We have no way to identify with it, right? Or to relate to it. It sounds great, right? There'll be a resurrection, but it's not something we've ever experienced, and yet it's chosen as the paradigm expression of gvura. Okay, so one thing we've said all along is that what makes it the greatest gvura, again, from our perspective, not from God's perspective, is because it's something that goes against the flow of nature. In other words, nature flows in a direction, and this goes against that flow. It's not the binding of the soul to the body, because that already happens when you're born. It's the fact that it goes against the flow. There's a natural flow. People are born, and as soon as you're born, you start dying. This goes against that flow. But what are the 3 points that Avad Ram's bringing out? And what is each one saying? Let's take the first one. All right, you wake up in the morning. So is that really Tchias HaMesim?
I mean, in the sense of your 1/60th of death. But
So what does that mean? You're 1/60th of dead. I mean, there's 2 ways you can understand that.
Control yourself.
Right. See, okay. So you could argue, if you want to go down the road, that you can actually divide life up into 60 parts.
60 days you'll be
Right.
dead.
Right. Or I would say also, it becomes like a very difficult thing. Like those things sound very nice, but if you start thinking into them, they must be expressing the idea that Tzvi David's saying, which is that there's no control. Well, that's a good question. What 60 refers to? But it's clearly
It's
what?
That's not about the Shisha now.
Batal B'Shish. Oh, that's good. That's it. Could be. I've never investigated that measure before, but could be. But Batal B'Shishim. 60 is what's required to nullify something. So that's interesting. I like that. But I'm saying, but the point you're making is a good point. So David's saying that what's the idea? The idea is you have no control. And when we say no control, what are you really referring to? We don't care. It's not just bodily control, but it's really access to the mind. Right. Your mind is shut down. you're in dream state. Your access to your mind is shut down.
Lucid dreaming is, I mean, it to me it's just having some amount of control over that.
Sort of. I mean, but yes and no, because really your subconscious just is released when you sleep. Now the only question is that when you say lucid dreaming, you mean dreams you don't have an REM? Because lucid dreams in general take place where you dream how many times per night? A gazillion. Right, a gazillion, like an insane amount.
What?
Right?
Wait a
Yeah.
How do you define
Point being though, but the point is that when you wake up, okay, so what's the Abu Ram trying to tell you? Like, what's his point? Is he trying to say what?
It's like when you bring back consciousness, it's like some kind of living again. Like you only live when you have consciousness.
Okay, so what point he's trying to bring out? Let's categorize it. You're right. What does that mean? Yeah, but that's nice, but it's very deep. Let's just like get the main.
Yeah.
I want to get the essential point across. In other words, like this. In other words, like I was saying before, Tchias HaMesim is being used here as the paradigm of Gevura. Okay, but now what I think Chazal want to show you is that there's three ways a person. There's three, I'd say. Phenomenon, I'd say maybe that's the best way to put it, of gevura that a person can how he can relate to God. There's three ways that Tchias HaMesim will serve as a vehicle to relate to that paradigm. So one is I would say, what is it when you wake up in the morning, right? So like as Fidava was saying, like you didn't have control, now you have control. So what the Abu Ram saying is it's like Tchias HaMesim. But what's the point he's trying to bring about? He's trying to bring about that in the idea of Gevura, there has to be, to some extent, there's an experiential aspect to it. A person experiences Gevura Hashem, right? So even though when you wake up in the morning, you're not really doing Tchias HaMesim, right? Of course, it's not really Tchias HaMesim. It can't be. But the point is that it has the character of Tchias HaMesim. Not to be brisker, but it has the character of Tchias HaMesim because you're going from a state where you have no control whatsoever, right? To now, right, you're in a state where you have no control of your mind. To now you have control over the mind, right? And that is the character of Tchias HaMesim. So what a person is supposed to do is he's supposed to use that experience of waking up in the morning, not to say that he was Mechayim Mesim, but to think into what the idea of Tchias HaMesim is. In other words, that phenomenon will now lead him into thinking about that Gevura of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You understand? Number two is highlighting what? It's a simple idea. There's another Gevura of Hashem that we talk about all the time, which is the institution of Schar B'Onesh. So you study Tchias HaMesim, and the idea of Tchias HaMesim leads you to understand deep ideas in how Schar B'Onesh works. Because what happens by Tchias HaMesim? Only those who, again, forgetting the Machlokas among the Gaon and Rishonim, only those who deserve it get to come back. Right? And that's the Schar B'Onesh institution. Even according to Rambam, who limits the amount of people, it's still an idea in Schar B'Onesh.
Which one was that?
That's the second one. Mechayim Mesim Rachamim Rabim. Correct.
So that's real Tchias.
Correct.
Right?
No, that's that. No, okay. So 1 second. So both the second and third one are referring to Tchias HaMesim Asalavo, but they're isolating different features. One feature of the idea of Tchias HaMesim as a concept is that it reflects God's Schar B'Onesh, and that's a critical idea in Gevurah Hashem.
So the second one is Tchias HaMesim Tzadikim, correct?
Right. Whereas the first one saying that when you wake up in the morning. So the idea of you studying of engaging in Tchias HaMesim is that when God expresses His Gevurah, there is an idea that we experience it. That's one notion of it. Another notion of Gevurah Hashem is the idea of God's decision-making process, so to speak, where He chooses the tzaddik over the rasha, where He rewards the tzaddik and punishes the rasha. So you see that in the institution of Tchias HaMesim. And what's the third one?
The actual thing itself?
The actual thing itself. The actual thing itself, right? Which is, in and of itself, it's an ikar of our belief in HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right? And the thing itself, the phenomenon itself, is only L'Asad Lava. So that's how I'm differentiating the second from the third. You know what I mean? The second one's isolating, according to Abu Ram, the second one's isolating God as being the force behind Schar B'Onesh. The third one is simply the phenomenon itself. That a person, if he wants to understand the greatest expression of Gevurah, he must study the phenomenon of Tchias HaMesim. You understand? So the first one's saying that the experience of waking up in the morning is sort of like a vehicle to recognize that there's a notion of Gevurah Hashem, the idea that you experience Gevurah Hashem. The second one is another idea in Gevurah Hashem, which is Schar B'Onesh, which you see in Tchias HaMesim. And the third one is the phenomenon itself, where you study Tchias HaMesim in and of itself. Again, I'm going to emphasize that you're seeing the greatest Gevurah of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But notice, you don't need the experiential of Tchias HaMesim to study that. You know what I mean? It's the idea itself. Now things get a little weird, right? So we say, Somech Noflim, Verofe Cholim, Umatir Asurim, Umakayim Unasal Edishan Afar. All right, so give me some translation here. What's Somech Noflim?
who fall.
Well, you have the article there, right?
No, it's
Oh.
Hebrew, but it's
Oh, okay, yeah. Okay.
Words.
Those who fall.
Those
What's
sick.
Rofech Cholim heals those who are sick.
Who needs to sit bound?
Well, all right. Matir Asurim. Like, give me an example of Matir Asurim.
No.
Get out of jail. That's it, right? And then what's Umekayim and Munasol Lishanei Afar?
Retains his faith among those who sleep in those.
Right, which is that's the hardest one to understand. It's very cryptic. What? What's the source for Somech Noflim?
Isn't that
I would guess.
146?
Well, first of all, what are we expressing here by Somech Noflim Rofech Cholim Matir Asurim? What are we expressing?
Torah.
Why?
Seems to be the theme.
Well, it is the theme, but how? What's the what? There's a subtle change here, but an important one that's taking place between what we said in the beginning by Mechai Mesim Atarav Loshia, right? Mechal Mechesim Mechai Mesim Brachim and Ravim, right? So we're making it. There's a paradigm. I think there's a paradigm shift taking place here. What is that shift?
These are not miraculous.
Well, let me give you what the Ian Tefilah says. He says very nicely. He says, for example, by Somech Noflim, he says, Gvuros Basar Adam he, right? Lahakos v'liftsoa ulahachalos, v'Hashem Yisbarach behafech. Okay, shehu rofech cholim. So man's nature is to hit and injure and wound, but God is the opposite. He heals. Or let's say Somech Noflim. He says, Gvuras basar adam hi lahashpil es hanashim ulahachniam. Right. So the koach of man is that he takes another person and beats him down. Whereas the Kadosh Baruch Hu, what does he do?
Supports them.
He supports him, picks him up. Right. Matir Asurim. What's Matir Asurim? It says basar adam la'anesh nechasin ula'asurin. Right. So man, what does he do? He punishes the person who breaks the law and he puts him in jail. But Hashem Yisbarach behefechu is Matir Asurim. Let's put it aside Lishanei Afar for a little while. So okay, great. So now what's he teaching us? What's this idea?
Are any of those really true?
The Svidava is already isolating that there's something there, even though there's some, which I think there is a shift here, but at the same time we are dealing with contrast, right? The same way Mechayim Mesim is referring to the contrast between death and life, or life and death. Whatever's going on here, there are also contrasts. I was a Nofel, and now I'm picked up. I was a Chol, and now I'm healed. I was in whatever Asurim is, right? And now I'm freed from that. Okay, very good. All right, so it's good. Okay, but now what? So you're shifting. This is shifting more into the experiential. I agree. But I want to go even further, though. What's the? In other words, why did the Ian Tefilah is very nice. The Ian Tefilah says that man. Let's say you get thrown into jail. Okay, let's use jail as a good example. You get thrown into jail. So and you get thrown into jail, and you were You were innocent, right? Like a la Shawshank Redemption. You're innocent, and you say to yourself, "There's no way I'm going to get out." Right? That's what a person thinks, right? Let's say you're given like multiple life sentences. So what thought goes to your head at that point?
This is your reality.
Right, and there's no what? There's no. I just said before. No, there's no escape physically, but that there's no chance. There's no chance whatsoever that I can ever escape the situation. All right, or let's take like Kola. It's not God's intervention. Of course, there could be God's intervention, but it's that when a person's lying on his bed and he's got stage 4,000 canceritis. So what does he say to himself? He says, "There's no hope. My status cannot change." Right? Or by Somech Noflim, the guy who's destitute. Right? So what does he say to himself? I'll always be an ani. Right? There's no. It's
hard to see the light.
Okay. So exactly, it's hard to see it. Okay. So what's the point here? So now I want to make the move. What? It's like this. The point is that Tchias Mesim. I want to say like this, right? When we say Mechai Mesim Atarav Loshia, and then we say Mechai Mesim Rachim Ravim. When we study that contrast, we can accept that. I think what you were hinting for when you said experiential, I think that's the right approach. In other words, when we make the statement of Tchias Mesim, when we recognize that's an intellectual reality. You know, as a person can say, as far as his mind's concerned, he can recognize the Gvur of Hashem in the purely intellectual framework. But the question is, there's another framework you have to recognize Gvur Hashem is. And that's in your psychological framework. Because the psyche, psychologically speaking, your emotions are geared in a way where we live in a natural world. I mean, that's our normative life is a natural world. I don't mean intellectually. Intellectually, a person can understand Chachmas Hashem is behind everything. But on a psychological level, if you really think about it, we live in a natural world, right? And a person normally, the normal person, would assume that if things are going a certain way, there's no reason to assume that will change. So you use these extreme situations to bring this point out. In other words, if a person's lying on his deathbed, he's got stage 4,000 canceritis, so intellectually he may say, of course God could intervene, but psychologically, what does he think to himself? Psychologically, his psyche says, it's over, right? It's over. There's no chance, there's no hope for any possible change in my situation. So what this is telling you is that that's a denial of Gurus Hashem. In other words, there's one thing to recognize Gurus Hashem in the context of the mind, but the psyche also has to come and recognize it. Because the psyche always thinks to itself, what does the psyche say? The psyche says, I'm used to a certain behavioral pattern, there's no reason to assume this could ever change. So the contrast, bring this idea out beautifully. I'm lying on my deathbed, guy says there's no way this could change. A guy's destitute, my status will never change. A guy, we'll get to what Matthias sermons later next week, but a guy's in a situation of, let's say, jail, multiple life terms, he says there's no way. That's his assumption. There's no way this could ever change. The no way it could ever change is the emotion that the Tefilah is coming to counter. You can never say such a thing. That implies a certain arrogance about knowledge of how the causal world works, and denial of Koach HaKadosh Baruch Hu.